Well, hello everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. Sorry that you weren't here at 3:30. We were fussing with wires and trying to make everything work, and it looks like it will. Glad to be home. This is the third time I've done this presentation. I did it in Omaha for the CSI North Central region, and I presented by Zoom to the Dallas chapter. Okay, today's speakers. It's an opportunity for the speaker to let you know why you should listen to him or her, and I'm going to tell you right now that none of this matters in the context of tonight, right? None of this really matters. I'm not a forensic expert. I really have no inside knowledge about the project. I'm just an old retired guy who spent a lot of hours reading the lengthy report and watching the YouTube videos of the testimony. So consider this as a book report based on my brief reading of what was going on. But there is one qualification that I do have, and that is reasonably competent architect. And those of you out there who are licensed, understand this because this is standard of care. If you ever have the misfortune of being in court, this is the standard upon which you are judged. You're not judged as being the best architect or the most excellent or accomplished architect. You're judged as reasonable competency. What is the bar that you need to pass for you to be acknowledged as a whatever? Reasonably competent product rep. What do we as specifiers look for when we go to you? Any profession that you are, spend a minute to think about what this means. What's the bar to become who you are? This is going to be a story of many people with varying degrees of expertise, and this reasonably competent term is going to be used quite a bit. So I'll ask this question: what standards do you expect from a reasonably competent professional? Shortly before 1 a.m. on June 14th, 2017, a small fire started out in flat 16 on the 4th floor of Grenfell Tower, a 24-story high-rise housing project in West London. Within 20 minutes, the fire spread to the building's exterior, and 20 minutes later, it had reached the roof. The fire continued to spread horizontally and vertically around the building and all 4 elevations until almost the entire building was enveloped in flame. By the time the fire was extinguished 24 hours after it started, 72 people were dead. This is the worst loss of life in a residential fire in the United Kingdom since the Blitz bombings of World War II. Almost immediately after the fire, the government created the Grenfell Tower inquiry to examine the circumstances leading up to and surrounding the fire. It was led by a retired Lord Justice. This is a kind of an equivalent to maybe one of the lower federal courts that feed into the Supreme Court. So Sir Martin had a pretty responsible job. There was an architect panelist, and there was a panelist who headed up an organization that managed public housing. So in addition to the comprehensive document discovery, the panel received witness testimony from everybody involved: the contractors, the manufacturers, the designers, the suppliers, local authorities responsible for the day-to-day management of the building, the government agencies, and most poignantly, the survivors of the fire. Almost every survivor of the fire gave an individual testimony of what they experienced. The inquiry's stated goal was to answer the question: how could such a thing happen in a modern building in a technologically advanced country? What you're seeing on the left side of the screen is a crimped connector from a Hotpoint model FF175 BP fridge freezer from flat 16. Using CT scanning, forensic experts found that the connector had been improperly crimped, causing arcing that started the fire. This is the root cause of the fire, this little piece of wire, okay? But it's far from the answer that the inquiry was seeking. And in fact, Hotpoint recalled a lot of their units and examined thousands of units and found that really this instance was sort of a one-off thing. It was not a systemic problem. The more important issue to the inquiry is how a minor blaze that should have been contained within one of the residential units turned so rapidly into an inferno that engulfed the entire exterior. Often we, as architects and probably people in the rest of the industry, do a renovation project and we wonder why we need to explore the code of the building when it was built. It's not the same building. Grenfell Tower, as built, is a code-compliant, safe building where resident safety depends on a non-combustible structure, compartmentation, and a stay-put fire safety plan. We're going to get into that term stay-put in the next few slides. In 2017, the building was refurbished. The exterior was reclad to modernize the appearance of the building and to make the building more energy efficient. But it used combustible materials on the exterior. The selection of the materials and the detailing of this project, along with the years of lack of maintenance of critical systems, made a safe building into an unsafe building. The stay-put fire safety plan that was used when the building was designed does not work anymore. So here's what the stay-put fire safety design is. You have compartmentation, but every unit, there's 6 units on the floor, has walls that are made of concrete, a floor and a ceiling that is made of concrete, and a door that's fire rated and on a closer. So when the fire occurs, all the residents not directly affected by the fire are urged to stay put. If you're not on the floor the fire's on, you are essentially in a fire safe box, right? And you stay put until the fire brigade extinguishes the fire or determines that the fire is spread to the point where you're in danger and need to get out. Since there was no large-scale evacuation, firefighters were unhindered in using the stairs to move about the building. And you'll notice there's only one stair. Looking at it from our modern eyes, we say, well, how can a one-stair, a one-exit building be safe? After looking into this, I'm convinced that it actually worked. And one of the reasons I'm convinced is that there were hundreds or thousands of these buildings in the UK. And prior to 2000, which was the latest date I could find, there were no fatalities reported prior to 2000 attributable to stay put. Does anyone want to guess how many fires the London Fire Brigade fought in residential public housing units in London in the 12 months prior to the Grenfell fire? Make a guess. None? One. 12,000. London Fire Brigade answered 1,000 calls a month. Thank God the math was easy so I could figure this out, right? So what's missing in 2017? The compartmentation is still there, but it's been breached. There's holes in it, right? The active fire protection, the ventilation fans, and the doors, the closers, aren't working as they should. So we architects are fond of saying that every building design is influenced by its environment and its neighborhood. And we don't necessarily just mean the specific surroundings and the climate that it's built in and so forth. More broadly, we're talking about the political, regulatory, and cultural history that led up to the time the building was conceived, designed, and built. So if you'll indulge me, we'll talk a little bit about history and politics. This is a chart of politics in England after World War II up until 2020. And I'll point out that we do it backwards here. In our world, blue is our Liberal Party, red is our Conservative Party. The rest of the world does it the other way. So when you see red, you're seeing the Liberal Party. When you're seeing blue, you're seeing the Conservative Party. So after World War II, and immediately after World War II ended, Churchill was voted out, and the Labour Party came in. And there was a big push in England to rebuild and to provide housing, education, health, and welfare for the well-being of all citizens. This is where you had the big social welfare state develop. The loss of the empire had been going on for a few centuries. We actually started it here, right? Didn't we, in 1776? I think we were the first of the colonies to sort of say we don't want to be under England anymore. And it had been accelerating, and after World War II, it really started going. So this Imperial England is winding down, and England turns to a revitalized Europe in the years after World War II as a trading partner. When Maggie Thatcher comes in 1980, actually 1979, she brought along neoliberal reforms and austerity movement, and she privatized a lot of what was going on. Her policies reshaped British politics and ended the post-war consensus. For the last 2 decades after Thatcher, the political debate in the UK, like other parts of the world, has been more contentious, and it's centered on immigration, nationalization, and Brexit. This directly affected the regulatory environment. Thatcher had the Building Act passed in 1984. Building codes are now called approved documents. Requirements are replaced with the word guidance. So builders and architects are given guidance. Private code consultants are allowed to compete with the local authorities economically to review and approve construction documents. So if you're an owner or an architect, you have your choice. You can go to the county government or the council government plan reviewer, or you can hire a private consultant. And even when the Labour Party get back in with Tony Blair, it's not a reversal. Tony Blair is not a particularly liberal person, right? He's carrying on much of the same stuff. He's relaxing the restrictions on combustible exteriors. He's allowing building fire assessments instead of being done by the fire brigade. Now it's done by building owners. So you're doing your own assessment of fire safety for the buildings that you manage. Blair introduces a one-in, one-out rule for Parliament. I should say Blair's government, right? So what that means is for every one new regulation that you want to pass, you have to take one regulation out. As the Tories get back in, this becomes 1 in and 2 out, or 1 in and 3 out. During this time, London Mayor Boris Johnson cut £30 million, including closing 10 fire stations in London, one of which was the North Kensington station, which literally was within walking distance from Grenfell Tower. And finally, a member of Parliament stood up on the floor of Parliament and said, are we at the point where we should entirely abolish building regulations? Essentially, let's get rid of the code. Well, that didn't pass, but that kind of gave you an idea of what was going on in this time frame. This is 2016. 2017 is when the fire happens. While all of this is going on, this timeline, we have a UK that in the beginning is conforming with European Union standards, because don't forget they're becoming trade partners. The UK joins the EU. This goes on for a while, and toward the end of this time period, now we're facing Brexit. So all this work toward combining leads to thoughts of, well, do we really still need to do this? Should we separate our standards? A lot of confusion and so forth, right? Actually, before I did this at the end of the slide, but I want to do it at the beginning, talking about the culture and the history of the UK. Anyone want to guess who the very model of a modern Major General is here?
Sir Milton Grenfell?
Very close. You always get them right. Actually, it is Field Marshal Francis Wallace Grenfell, the first Baron Grenfell. The history of England is a history of contrast. There's an obvious pride in being the power, being the empire for many, many years, in the culture and the history, in advancing science. This also comes with a break between the classes. There's a lot of racism, and the whole sort of colonial approach is really a tarnish on the record of the English Empire. London becomes the seat of a great empire. London is the greatest city in the world. Time starts in London, right? At Greenwich. That's where time starts. That's the kind of influence that London had. Even after the empire started to wane, the Industrial Revolution took place, and then you started to see a growth in banking, manufacturing, insurance, and so forth. And then later on, it's still in a very important location, attracting even today global talent and investment. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is a small, densely populated borough. It's west of Greenwich, London City, and Westminster. The quote at the bottom is from a report from the 1980s. A jarring juxtaposition. You have the wealthiest 5% and the poorest 5% of the city's population living at opposite ends of the same street, and that is literally true. So just to sort of give you a context of giving you just a couple minutes on 2,000 years of English history. Kensington and Chelsea are really affluent neighborhoods. It's the Royal Borough in memory of Queen Victoria, who was born at Kensington Palace. She established cultural and educational institutions, the Victoria and Albert Museum at the top, Royal Albert Hall in the center. And as a result of that, high-end shopping areas developed. The bottom is Harrods department store. None of us can afford to buy a suit there. The borough also has rough areas, including North Kensington. North Kensington has a long history of crime and drugs and violence, particularly in the public housing. The borough also includes gentrified areas like Notting Hill. Notting Hill was the site of a serious race riots in 1957. Right now, if you wanted to buy a one-bedroom apartment in one of the buildings that was the site of those race riots, you'd pay over £1 million. So all this is kind of going on in this relatively small part of London. Public housing in the UK is not the same as it is here. Are any of you surprised at the current 17% of the population of the UK lives in public housing, but in the US only 2% does? Is that unsurprising to anyone, or that is surprising, right? Further surprising is that the maximum numbers after World War II, the UK had 35% of their population in public housing. The maximum for the US ever in our history is 5%. So the roots of public housing go back to the 10th century. The councils, they built the first tenements in the early part of the 19th century. The end of the 19th century, the national government starts to kick in some money. World War I and particularly World War II really amp it up. Homes fit for heroes after World War I. And after World War II, I mentioned the Blitz before. The Blitz destroyed 1.2 million homes in London. So that's the kind of housing crisis that they were facing. The middle photo there is kind of the housing that you would expect in this sort of before and after World War II period. Low rise, kind of like our suburbs. As you get to the 1960s, you get these sort of 3- and 4-story multi-unit flats. And in the 1970s, you end up with high-rise towers. So the neighborhood where Grenfell Tower is much like the photograph that I have at the bottom, where you have this combination of sort of medium-rise and high-rise buildings. And that's when Grenfell Tower started, was opened in 1974. It was refurbished right before the fire in 2016. Grenfell Tower is part of the Lancaster Road estate. In 1963 and 64, slum clearance and redevelopment program proposed a new community with 3 mid-rise housing blocks leading to a 24-story concrete tower. The early plans included amenities like shops, offices, a swimming pool, and gardens. Okay, you know what happened. They were cut because of budget. So all that was left was essentially the housing. Still, a very vibrant neighborhood grew up, mostly North African immigrants. Just 5 years after the tower opened, residents were complaining about vandalism, broken lifts, and lights. By the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, this was among the toughest public housing projects in the world. Picture the States and kind of what our public housing was like in the 60s and 70s here. That's what you would find right here on this site. But by the mid-2000s, the area was stabilized. There still were people who survived that sort of rough part and were still there. In greater North Kensington, you have a lot of wealthier people coming in because you're right on the border of the wealthy parts of Kensington. In 2008, a movement in the Royal Borough started to meet a shortage of housing and of school space for its growing population at both ends of the economic spectrum. So after several months of study, the site of the existing Kensington Sports Center was slated for demolition, and that was chosen as the site for a new school and a new leisure center complex. Think of it as a rec center with a school attached to it. In response to the 2009 Notting Hill Bourne South Master Plan, the borough essentially picked out this site. And the only thing that we would correct here is that the red line would be on this side of Grenfell Tower. So you can see it's kind of a winding site. It's going to end up with a really nice architectural design of a school and rec center. We're enhancing the exterior improvements, and we're providing for sale housing and new retail and new office and business spaces. And we all know what's going to happen. Budget cuts, right? So the first thing that gets cut are essentially the same things that got cut in 1974. The housing's gone, the retail and business space is gone, and the budget for demolishing Grenfell Tower is gone. So here's what you have at that point. You've got where the red line is now, with Grenfell Tower still standing there in its shoddy, brutalist concrete shape right next to this new thing that's going in. And you can see the architect's rendering of the school. And in the back, those sort of cloud or tree-looking things. Grenfell Tower is actually hiding right there. I want you to keep in mind the way the architect rendered this. Obviously, people don't want an ugly-looking building there. People thought of it as a sore thumb. I even found one quote where they said, instead of a sore thumb, it looked like a middle finger to our new project, right? So they found the money to clad the outside of this public housing building and make it look more acceptable to the wealthier people moving in. So we've got two things going on. We've got the Kensington Academy and Leisure Center, our calc. And then later on, we're going to look at the recladding of Grenfell Tower. The council, the RBKC, is the client for the Leisure Center. They solicited an architect through the EU's competitive tender. OJEU is the official journal of the European Union. So they have a bidding standard that has to be followed. The architect, Studio E Limited, is vastly experienced. They are an exceptional architect. They've done 3 academies and 3 leisure centers in the previous 5 years. They are award-winning. The principal in the hearing testified that there were only a handful of other firms in the UK and on the continent who could compete with them. And he was right, okay? This is a good marriage, an excellent architect, and at the bottom, it was a major win for us. 5 years later, right, we're going to be cladding Grenfell Tower. The client role goes to the tenant management group, KCTMO. They are a contractor to the RBKC. They decide they want to hire the architect without direct competition. They manipulate the process to avoid the tender rules of the OJEU. The first fees that the architect wanted were essentially cut in half. They also manipulated a way of getting more money to the architect. So this is bad. I mean, obviously you shouldn't do it. What's probably worse is Studio E architects had no direct experience in high-rise residential, in occupied buildings, or in recladding the exterior. Not only did the firm not have that experience, no member of the firm had any experience. So essentially, they hired an unqualified architect. Also note at the bottom, for the school, it was a major win for us. For Grenfell Tower, the tower is a poor relative of KALC. Also, what's going on at this time, you notice there's 3 or 4 different names at the top for the architect firm. They are in financial trouble. They're going through different ways of incorporating themselves, of structuring themselves, and then look at the staffing. 45, less than 10 years later, 9. So this is a firm that's in trouble. The project brief, we would call that a program, starting out with improving the public realm, improving office space, and then you get to overcladding the tower, including windows for energy efficiency. That's near the bottom of the list, not for appearance. Although this probably was a hidden motivation, it's nowhere stated that that's why they wanted to do it. The architect is mainly interested in the ones I have outlined in red. Improving the public realm and overcladding the tower. And the reason that it's important, and this is from the testimony, these are emails between the project manager who had been at a meeting, the first one he's sending to his boss on the train back, saying that the TMO is eager to investigate the opportunity to clad Grenfell Tower. The principal is giddy. He says this will prevent it looking like a poor cousin to our project, our important project. And then later on in a published statement that the firm made, in urban planning terms, the interface between the tower is very important, particularly for KALC, which would be so close to its base. So I think there's no question that the focus of this firm was on the bigger job and not on the smaller one. The code for exterior walls for the materials that are put on it defined two different levels of fire resistance for the cladding, above and below 18 meters. You'll see that for each of the two areas there is a British and an EU standard. And this results from the movement to conform the EU standards to the British, or I should say the British to the EU standards. This is the European standard. The expert who testified was talking to the attorney, the Queen's Counsel, prior to going on, and testifying, and he's explaining to her what this means, and he says, this doesn't burn. This is very burny. And then there's steps down, right? So this term very, very burny was actually used by the attorney, and I think it kind of embarrassed the expert, but we're going to use that as well. European Class B is the second step from the left. The Class C is the third step from the left, and we won't go into exactly what this means in terms of the numbers and so forth, but what's interesting is that when you look at the national class, it's a different test. And I'll show you the differences in the next slide. But essentially, there's a card over here that is marked off showing where class 1, 2, and 3, and 4 are. So a fire is started with a radiant panel from the left side, and it burns horizontally. And the extent of the burn before the flame goes out tells you what class it is. Class 0, class naught, or they call it class O also. Class naught doesn't even start a fire, right? So here we have class naught requirement where it doesn't burn. Should be a class A for the European class. That doesn't really fit. And they're two separate tests too, so that part doesn't work. Now you go down to the below 18 meters, and I was expecting you to have a class 1 or class 2 or something, right, to kind of compare to what's above. It's a completely different test. It's still part of the BS 476 protocol, but a completely different type of test. So this slide sort of gives you an idea of how mixed up things are at this state in time with the regulations. On the top is the EN test, the test from Europe. On the bottom is the British standard. You can see that the European test is a vertical test. There's a gas flame at the bottom, and essentially the rating is on how far up the flame burns. On the bottom side is the British test. There's the radiant panel. And the important thing to keep in mind about both of these, despite the fact that they're trying to figure out how to rate materials on the exterior of the building, these are interior tests. These are similar to the Steiner tunnel test, the ASTM E84. I'm right, architects? That's the right number, right? Yeah. Basically, that's the one that we use for testing carpets and wallpaper and so forth for flame spread and smoke. Did I remember my spec writing? I'm getting nods from guys that know and gals that know. Thank you very much. So anyway, these are material tests. They're small scale. They're designed for the interior. What do we need to really tell what's going on? We need something like this. And at first glance, this is the multi-story fire test NFPA 285. Well, it really isn't. It's the British standard version that came into effect in 2002 and 2005. This is an assembly test. This is a full-scale mock-up, several stories tall. I want to point out that here's the fire tech here on this first test. This is 6 feet, so that's human scale. Look at the people over here, right? Bigger tests of what's actually going on the wall, not material tests. They are tests of the entire assembly. Big difference. Studio E in the material selection process first wanted solid zinc panels and mineral wool. And the main reason that they did was that matched or it was compatible to the school. That's their whole focus. You can see here for the next 2.5 years, there's a back and forth, a stop and go. Cladding fabricators are brought in they suggest aluminum composite materials. MEP consultant says there's no way mineral wool is going to give you the sort of R factors that you need, or U factors. You need to go to polyiso. Contractor comes in high. They bring in a facade consultant. They say it's going to be ACM. That's what everybody's doing. They end up going out to bid with zinc panels and polyiso insulation. Ryden wins the contract, and then they come back with revisions to their bid to meet the budget, going to a cheaper panel. Mock-up is installed with a fire-resistant core and face-riveted mounting. Architect insists on cassette mounting, and during construction we get the Arconic ACM cassette and the Celotex polyiso. And all these words that the non-architects may not understand, we're going to explain them as we go through. I put on my reasonably competent architect hat and I said, okay, let's look at things that are definitely okay, or others which I think, as an architect, I could have made work, I could have made comply with the code, and I outlined them in green. And then I went through and I said, okay, there's some things that definitely don't comply, and there are other things that probably don't, right? So note how the architect starts out in the green, the stuff that would work. And these yellow items are introduced where we end up at the very bottom line with a completely does not work system. So as a result of this process, we end up essentially with this detail for the cladding system at the window. And we have 2 layers of polyiso foam. We have a cavity. It's a range screen system. We have aluminum composite material, ACM, with a polyethylene core. And then there are other materials which I haven't mentioned. We have an unplasticized polyvinyl chloride window surround. We have polystyrene cores in the window sandwich panels where you don't have glass. They're really not shown. And we have an EPDM membrane. The expert on the way materials burn testified that if a fire is ignited in a cladding system made of these materials, we have to expect it to spread quickly and catastrophically. Any competent fire professional should have been aware of these dangers. Aluminum composite materials are made of a plastic core in the middle and metal on the outside. Architects loved them when they came out because they wouldn't wrinkle. They were nice, clean, smooth, great looking panels. There are 2 ways that this particular product came. That came in a riveted system and in a cassette system. So the riveted system up here at the top is essentially flat panels that are face attached to the framing. Any real architect hates this, right? Because we don't want to see the bolts, the rivets, right? So they came up with a cassette system where you take a flat sheet and you fold it. And you can see that over here, where it's folded and tucked back and the fastening is concealed. The way they fold it is they cut a V groove into the panel, and that allows you to make a nice, crisp 90-degree bend. The problem is that the polyethylene is exposed at each end of the panel and at the folds, where on the riveted system, it's only exposed at the edges. That's why the riveted system, we'll find out in a second, passes the fire test, and the cassette system doesn't. Matt Ford's looking at me. I'll explain. I'll explain why this is true. I know things have changed here. So the Arconic Reynobond polyethylene ACM was tested several times. Arconic in Europe misled the British Board of Agrément. They're the people that give you the certificate that you passed. Arconic submitted test reports for a specific configuration to obtain a general suitability certificate. Their riveted systems passed, their cassette systems did not. Their fire-rated systems passed, their PE systems did not. And interestingly, and I'm going to just ask Matt afterwards if he knew this is true, color differences matter. Have you ever heard that? I was stunned, right? That when they were testing, certain colors would pass and certain colors wouldn't in the same type of test. So look at what happened here, right? Every one of the cassette tests ended up with an E. As our expert said, very burny, right? The riveted systems had multiple results. The problem with this chart is it doesn't necessarily show the same product tested. And so they ended up with some B tests and some C tests. Now remember, C works below 18 meters, B works above, right? They got this BBA board, which is now private, used to be a government board, to certify that because they passed a certain test back in 2006 or in 2011, this product in general would work for any high-rise building. Despite knowing it was unsafe, senior managers at the firm did not withdraw the Reynobond 55 PE from sale. The inquiry says, Arconic thus promoted and sold the product knowing that it presented a significant danger to those who might use it. Arconic's marketing manager in 2007 attended a seminar of the industry, of the metal industry, and he learned about the risks of ACM. The speaker ended the seminar by saying that a polyethylene ACM panel contains the same fuel power as an oil tanker truck. And his concluding remarks, this is 2007, what will happen if only one building made out of PE is on fire and it kills 60 to 70 people? After the inquiry, Arconic's response was, we make a raw material, the fabricators make the cladding systems. So we have no responsibility for how they do it, and ultimately the designers of the building determine how the product is used. Kingspan was actually only 5% of the insulation. And I'm doing them first because the inquiry called them deeply entrenched and persistently dishonest. They marketed their K15 insulation for buildings over 18 meters between 2006 and 2019, knowing that it was a flammable material. They created a spurious market for polymer-based insulations for use on high-rise buildings. The British Board of Agrément and the local authorities were criticized for not rigorously examining the product, and they actually inadvertently facilitated the dishonest marketing that Kingspan did. Kingspan essentially had the lion's share of the market. Their response is that we didn't know K15 was used on Grenfell because it was put in when there was a shortage of the product you specified. Your expert said that the K-15 didn't cause the fire, and the report actually stated that the type of insulation was immaterial. Well, this was one expert. There was other testimony countering this. But the reason Kingspan is in there and gets such a bad reputation is that they essentially created the market. Celotex at this time is being bought out by Sangamon. In order to enhance their company for the buyout, they want to sell all the product they can. So their management is sort of saying, well, Kingspan can get on these high-rise buildings. There's a lot of them out there. Why can't we do it, right? Their people looked at Kingspan's literature, and they went to the same testing agencies, former government testing agencies that have now been privatized, and said, how did Kingspan do it? And essentially, the testing agencies told them how to pass. The way that Celotex and Kingspan both passed their multi-story fire tests was that they tested an assembly that had cement board on front and back. Right? Anything's going to pass that. So they ended up with a certificate that said this material passes the BS 8414 test, and they use that to market. Well, the fallacy is that test is an assembly test, and every time you do a different assembly, you have to do that test and get it passed. Celotex says the system shown in our sales literature was tested and met the safety criteria, which was partially true depending on what year you were looking at, what they were marketing. Grenfell was substantially different to what we had in our sales brochure, and design decisions are made by construction professionals. Beyond those three, and there were many, many more material manufacturers, the window placement was a huge factor here. We have a photograph of the new window going in. This is a construction photo, and then we have a detail at the bottom. The orange is the location of the old window, and the clever ones out there are looking at that and saying, well, that's in line with the concrete, right? Look at where the new window is in relation to where the concrete is. Now, all of a sudden, you have these gaps that need to be filled. Specified mineral fiber wasn't necessarily put in like that. You have a gap here. The window is in from where it was installed left and right, so there's a gap. You have a flammable EPDM here. You have a flammable UPVC here. And not shown again is the aluminum sandwich panels with polystyrene core that were specified and used. Another expert looked at the paths of fire and identified 6 possible paths: vertically up and down the columns, horizontally across the ACM spandrel panels, horizontally along the window head and sill, vertically along the edge of the windows, through those very burny aluminum sandwich panels with polystyrene core. And what hasn't been mentioned is the architectural crown at the top of the building. This is an ACM folded panel that gives an architectural appeal to the top of the building. There's no purpose for it other than looks, but you'll find out that ultimately when the fire hits it, it starts to burn and it doesn't stop burning. So that's the pathway that is probably the most damning, at least towards the middle of the fire. I also didn't talk about, and there's a whole section on cavity barrier and fire barriers. They're specified by code. Essentially, it's an intumescent strip in the case of one, and in the other it's a non-combustible strip. And I think we still have something in our code like that, that the fire break versus fire stop, right? This A thing here, at the very tip of that point, there was nothing. There was a complete void that went all the way up the building. I can't begin to tell you my anger and disgust and just depression at how many people involved in all aspects of this project team testified to the effect of, I had no idea how dangerous this cladding was until the day of the fire. Those of us who have been in the business for a few years, I mean, how long have we been coming to seminars like this, learning about the multi-story test, learning about the NFPA 285 test? It has to have been, what, 20 years? If only we could have known, but we did know. You know, if we had been alert, we would have seen news stories about all these fires in all these different parts of the world with combustible plastics, not necessarily all ACM, but all with combustible plastics on the outside of buildings. And the clever ones among you are saying something's missing. Combustible cladding fires in the UK. None of those were in the UK. I found 6 of them that occurred before 2017. What they have in common, all were housing projects. All had combustible plastic exterior products, a couple of them ACM. Each one of these 6 fires, look at the dates, each one resulted in a public inquiry. Not to the extent of the one I'm talking about at Grenfell, but they had a public inquiry. And 5 of the 6 inquiries ended up by recommending that flammable plastics be banned from high-rise buildings. Parliament never passed this rule. 1991 to 2016, told time and time again that they need to get this out of the code, and they never did it. And why is that? Don't forget about the 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 2 out, 1 in, 3 out rule. The government just couldn't get past that. They couldn't figure out how to get a needed law put in and trade off, you know, something else for it. The fire started early in the morning. The tenant, Mr. Kabidi, is sleeping in the living room, was aware of the fire, left the living room, woke up his 2 suite mates. They all left the building, and on the way out, he shut off the main breaker to the power. How many of you in the midst of smoke and flame would have thought to do that on the way out of the building? Anyway, they go out. He calls the fire department. Fire trucks arrive 5 minutes after the call. So while I did slam Boris Johnson a bit for closing the fire station, I don't think that had a significant difference in the fire department getting there. Firefighters enter the building. 5 minutes after they enter the building, the fire breaks out of flat 16 and into the exterior. But the firefighters on the 4th floor don't know that because they're on their way up. So they have no idea what's happening outside the building. They come in, you know, smoke, they're in their breathing apparatus and suits, night vision goggles. They have to check all these rooms, make sure there's nobody in it, right? We're saving human life. Finally get to the kitchen at 1:14. They make 4 unsuccessful attempts because they can't get into the kitchen. And they're surprised because they put out fires, right? You know, what did I say? 1,000, I mean, not to this extent, but 1,000 calls, you know, every month. I mean, they've done this before. They can't get in, they can't get in, they can't get in. Finally, at 1:20, they are able to get in the kitchen, and the reason is because at 1:15, from outside the building, they had a covering jet on the flames outside the building. In 1 minute, the fire's put out, right? So they've done the immediate task that they were supposed to do. They put out the fire. They notice that the window is missing, and there's one hell of a fire outside, and they're shocked. Fire spreads really well up. Doesn't spread as good horizontally, and hardly spreads at all side to side. The expert explained that when a piece of wood, let's say, is on fire, the wood itself doesn't extend the flame as it burns. What happens is that the flame heats up the wood, and the wood produces gases and liquids that are flammable out in front of the edge of the flame. The flame ignites that gas, and that is what keeps the fire burning. So we have 3 matches here showing the 3 different ways of fire spread. They're all going to be lit at the same time, and I want you to get in your mind's eye what you're going to see. We'll start them up here. And actually on the horizontal one, you can kind of see the gases and the smoke, forming. But it's no surprise, is it, that the match with the flame at the bottom burns up really quickly. Really no surprise necessarily that the horizontal one burns. It does take a lot longer. Everything's consumed on the vertical one. Now look at the flame burning down, and you know what's going to happen, right? There's not enough heat at the bottom of that flame to really burn down. So this is what you would expect to see in a fire with combustible materials. And that's exactly what happened. The fire went from being reported to breaking out. It took about 12 minutes for that to happen. It took a while for the fire to get going. It took from 106 to 125 to get to floor 14. And then it only takes 2 minutes to get to the roof. So the pathway up is exactly what you would expect, right? Now, what about the pathway down? Well, the expert who put this together has a piece of PE-ACF. There's a pan at the bottom down here that catches drips. And you're seeing drips of liquid flame coming down and catching in that fire. Now we're 3 minutes later. The panel is completely engaged, and now you have rivers of flaming, burning polyethylene dripping down. And even when this next clip here, you get to the very top, you think, man, this has got to burn out, right? Look at what happens now. The expert was keen to point out that this is not a scientific test, it's a demonstration. And I think it's a pretty good one for lay people like us. We're going to look at the fire. I've just taken clips, very short clips, as the fire sort of burns through. So we'll take a look at this. I'll do a little bit of commentary. Filmed at 106. You can see Mr. Kabibi's apartment. The fire's still inside. 111, you're seeing it start to break out. This is right about when it starts. Here we are about 6 minutes later, and this is still a maintainable fire. You can see they've got the outside fire streams going now. If they had an aerial pump, it's possible that the fire could have been put out, although that's complete speculation. Here we are at the 14th floor, and you can start to see it burn. And you'll start to see chunks of burning insulation, burning ACM panels dropping down, and finally the fire is just about to reach the roof, and then reaches the top of the building. And we start to see our horizontal spread. 20 minutes. So I put together clips of what we just saw and what you would see if I had gone on longer. This is what we saw. So here are other clips. In the second clip, the fire's gotten to the crown, gone over, and now it's starting to come down. You can also start to see fire going into the building and coming out. In this location, they're speculating that the fire got into this unit and was burning up and down. You can see over here just horrible, frightening pictures of the building completely being engulfed and flames just, engulfing the entire building. Finally, towards the end, they start to get aerial equipment out there, and they're able to get the fire, if not under control, at least moderate it until it finally burns itself out. They put together these charts. This is the time frame that we saw. You are looking at the east and the north side of the building, and the west and the south side. And this is not the exterior. This is the unit being consumed by fire. So you're seeing when each of these units was engulfed by fire from the outside, essentially burning in. So we'll take this and move it up to the corner, and I'll show you the photographs that I had. And kind of by looking at them and looking at the number of units that are burned, you can see how this spread around the crown and down. This tragedy resulted from a long chain of errors, incompetence, carelessness, and what the inquiry called a culture of noncompliance with fire safety rules. In some cases, this resulted from an inexplicable ignorance of building regulations by our brother and sister design professionals. There was a widespread failure among all parties to take responsibility for important aspects of the work that affected fire safety. Most alarmingly, the inquiry discovered evidence of dishonesty and fraud involving corporations who manufacture the building products and the testing agencies charged with certifying compliance. This is probably the most detailed and documented and thoroughly understood fire disaster in history. The inquiry itself cost about 180 million pounds. You can see the evidence and testimony. This is Martin Moore-Pick, the chair of the committee, saying that for we as an industry to provide service, actually the services that we should provide as reasonably competent people, right? We need to be competent to carry out our functions, and we must exercise reasonable skill and care in doing so. Studio E Architects, as I said, was award-winning, had a notable record, but no experience in projects similar to Grenfell Tower. The inquiry was clear that Studio E had a shocking misunderstanding of their responsibilities as an architect. Code, health, safety, and welfare, material choices. They had little interest in assuring that the materials that they did select were safe. Their main concern was transforming the look of the tower so as not to detract from the Kensington Academy and Leisure Center. They failed in the technical side of architecture, but also on the business side. They were in financial trouble for several years. Their staff, they had a great loss of staff, so they had younger people doing things that they probably shouldn't without sufficient supervision. They were lax about making sure that people acquired their CEUs. They were confused about the responsibilities that they had. The principal was not directly involved, and they had inexperienced staff making decisions. Studio E failed to meet the standards of a reasonably competent architect and therefore bears a very significant degree of responsibility for the fire. Exova is a leading provider of technically demanding testing and advisory services. They employed 4,500 people in 121 laboratories in 32 countries. They are definitely the A-team for doing studies about fire. Exova made no analysis of the original fire strategy from 1974. They made no examination of the existing building, no site visits, and they had no final fire strategy. They did not address the exterior wall design. I'm going to read you a quote from their first draft that was reviewed. It is considered that the proposed changes will have no adverse effect on the building in relation to external fire spread, but this will be confirmed by an analysis in a future issue of this report. Keep those words in mind, because those same words appeared in the next issue of the report, and the next issue of the report, and the last issue of the report, which, by the way, was not the final issue because there wasn't one. Exova's attitude was wholly inconsistent with a careful approach to life safety to be expected of a reasonably competent fire engineer. Ryden was the general contractor. They started out as a property maintenance contractor. They branched into facility management and into contracting. They won the competitive tender midway through the design process, became the principal contractor under a design and build contract. Design build, we would call it here, right? Studio E and their consultants, including Exova, now worked for Ryden. Ryden's management had never done design build. They lacked the experience and knowledge to carry out their responsibilities. They saw their role as the traditional one that they had been doing, scheduling and organizing, but not monitoring the safety and the quality of the work. Ryden failed in its responsibility as a design and build contractor to adequately oversee the design and construction work. They bear considerable responsibility. Harley Facades is the cladding contractor or subcontractor. They're very experienced. 1996 was when they were founded as a construction company. In 2002, they branched off into this external cladding company. You can see they were proud of Grenfell Tower. Here's a brochure that they put out in 2016, just before the fire. They were brought on board during negotiations. They saved 327,000 pounds using a cheaper cladding and did not return the savings to the owner, but conspired with the contractor Ryden to cover Ryden's 212,000 pound budget bust. Harley's owner's son was the project manager. His first full-time experience with Harley, although he had worked part-time during his time at the university. His degree was in motorsport management. I don't know what that is. I suspect it wasn't necessarily germane to running a construction project like this. Harley failed to meet the standards of a reasonably competent cladding contractor. It bears a significant degree of responsibility for the fire. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea had a statutory obligation to approve the design documents. Its staff was overworked, poorly trained. They had little knowledge of the risk associated with the materials of the building. Since the advent of private plan reviewers, their building control had competitive pressure to accommodate clients. So they accepted the submissions without reviewing the assertions of others that the exterior wall system was suitable. RBKC failed its function of ensuring that the design complied with building regulation. Therefore, it bears considerable responsibility for the dangerous condition of the building immediately upon completion of the work. Tenant management organization was responsible for fostering good relations with its tenants, was responsible for selecting the architect, and was responsible for maintaining fire safety. I didn't mention anything at all about this, but regarding fostering good relationship with the tenants, there's a lot in the report about the relationship being characterized by distrust, dislike, personal antagonism, and anger before and during the project. Regarding the architect selection, they manipulated the process to avoid hiring the architect by public tender. Their fire inspector, they had their own fire inspector to look at their buildings. He misrepresented his experience and qualifications. He invented certifications. So it would be like if any of you take the little piece of paper or PDF from this class and you said, oh, I'm a certified high-rise housing cladding investigator now, right? This is the level of what this guy did. His method for doing fire risk assessments had serious shortcomings. This was from an audit report before the fire. And he noted no deficiencies in his recent fire door inspection. Much like here, there's a requirement that fire doors be inspected every year to make sure that they seal correctly and close. So he didn't find any in Grenfell Tower. After the fire, a forensic inspector found 77 out of 120 self-closing devices either missing or broken. The TMO shares blame for the fire due to chronic and systemic failures in his management and his relationship with the tenants. So the final word, the 4 bullet points on the left. I saw this and I said, this is what we preach at CSI with our CDTs and our CCSs and all this stuff. Creating and understanding the contract, right? Isn't that the basis of what we were taught? Identifying responsibilities. Who does what? The role of the client, right? Failing short of reasonable competence. Limited knowledge of regulations, industry standards, and materials of construction. This is all pretty basic stuff, right? The committee came up with these recommendations here: improving training, prioritizing safety over speed and costs, and so forth and so on. They're all good things. Some things have been done. They have revised and clarified the building code. Progress is being made. This took 7 long years. There have been no criminal actions. Part of doing this inquiry, the government froze criminal actions, and they're going to do more investigations based on what they found here before they do anything criminal. That probably won't start until maybe the middle of next year. The architect on the left-hand side there really didn't say much, just sort of heard years of testimony. I'm going to give her the last word because I think she says it well.
Returning home from a holiday in June 2017, I flew over West London and saw the burning tower in the early hours from the air. As for so many others, this was a profound shock. First, of course, as a human response, but also as a professional who has spent their career working to make buildings safe. Our recommendations place new burdens and responsibilities on people and organizations. I make no apologies for that. Put simply, if you work in the construction industry and you do not feel the weight of responsibility you have for keeping people safe, you are in the wrong job.
So we'll end there and open it up for any questions. And Mr. Gantner, you've sat through this, so you can have the first.
Yeah, I've sat through it twice, and one thing you touched on when you did it in Omaha. You didn't. I don't recall you saying it tonight, but you touched on a little bit of what the cost of life was due to the fact that they were supposed to shelter in place.
There's no question that the the failure on the fire brigade and in fact on everybody to understand that the stay put system didn't work caused a lot of the deaths. A lot of people had been trained and drilled when there's a fire, go into your apartment and wait. The other thing is that they did a study of the remains of the people that died very extensively, and they determined that no one died from the flame. Essentially, every death, and there may have been one or two that jumped, but almost every death was as a result of the smoke and the products. Polyiso, it puts out some horrible things, including the same component of zycon gas, which was used in both World War I and World War II. So I think some of the survivors felt comfort that people weren't literally burned up, but that it had to be just a horrible death. It just had to be really terrible. Russ.
Did the flames go all the way around the entire, encircle the entire south and east side as well?
Yes, yeah. The bottom floors were the only ones that weren't completely consumed, and the height of the safe zone at the bottom kind of varied, but essentially, to just sort of in broad terms, up the building, around the crown, and as it goes around the crown, it drips down and burns down, right?
Two different panel systems, and why that was such a non-compliant situation as opposed to the pinned or the bolted version?
I think it's mainly because there's more exposed polyethylene, because you've got all the folds, and you've got much more area. And the other thing is you've got that pan at the bottom, right? I mean, you saw the not scientific test demonstration. That had to have been.
Those horizontal surfaces had a double whammy. They were because it's a horizontal surface, they get hit with more heat, and they were catching the dripping materials. So they were actually containing some of it at the same time.
George, you didn't mention it, but HVAC, was this a unit that the ductwork helped spread the smoke, or do you know?
So under stay put, the central core is, and you're going to have to help me with, is pressurized in the event of a fire, right? Because you want to push the flame in.
Yeah, the elevator.
Right. And actually, they had converted that to where the ventilation air and the air that's used in the event of a fire is the same system. They just reversed the fan. Some of that didn't work. There still were punchless things that needed to be done. So that did, in some cases, spread the flame.
So to the best of your knowledge, no smoke dampers, fire dampers, smoke dampers,
There
suppression systems, sprinklers?
no sprinklers. Never any sprinklers. There really, under stay put, there is no fire alarm system. Now they added individual units within each of the apartments, and in fact, that's what woke up the tenant in the first apartment. But it was thought back then that would just confuse people. I have a fire on the 5th floor. You're on the 12th floor. I don't want to wake you up. We have this under control, and in fact, that system worked, right? But it was dependent on keeping things like fire doors, like ventilation systems, functioning the way they should.
So, was some no review part of the concern, or is that still being discovered? Whether somebody approved something that shouldn't have been approved?
There were approvals, but the competency of some of the people looking at the submittals or making the submittals wasn't what it should have been. I don't know that any of that necessarily contributed, other than I can think about some discussion with the fire breaks. where they really didn't understand that they needed to go at every floor. And
Or she said design build, so is that like the US design build where the architects and engineers work for the contractor?
right,
Yeah.
right, and you know, the contractor Ryden really didn't understand what it took to be a design build contractor anyway, because they had never done it. So
I thought the FR core got VE'd out in the process.
it was in there at some point. Yeah.
Is that how it worked?
And that's probably the one that you're talking about, because you're right on that one slide with all the changes it was put in. In fact, they used the FR core in the mock-up, and the architect is concerned about what it looks like and the color, and the fact that it's face fastened, had no clue that it was FR as opposed to
That actually
BP.
blew me away.
Right. I'm sorry, you had a question? No? Anyone else?
Good job.
Thank you. You guys are being easy. Yeah.